A cannon roared over the weekend, and its reverberations are being felt all across Europe. In one country after another, in the European Parliament elections, the pro-war, pro-globalist governments fell one after the other. Some of them have had to call elections in their country. So severe was the drubbing that their austerity, pro-war, pro-NATO, pro-EU politics has caused them. In France, perhaps the most significant, elections have been called by President Macron, Emperor Macron, Le Petit Roi, I call him. He's had to call elections because he got less than half of the vote of Le Pen and the National Rally of France, which purports at least to be opposed to the EU, opposed to the warmongering against Russia, opposed to the endless war drive and sanctions which the President of France has been in the vanguard for. The Prime Minister of Belgium cried bitter tears, and as Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Charles Dickens' Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. The Prime Minister of Belgium was thoroughly defeated, but the more significant defeat was little soldier Schulz in West Germany, the Chancellor of West Germany. I say West Germany because East Germany voted overwhelmingly, almost entirely, against the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz of the ridiculously named Socialist Party of Germany, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, and my opposite number, the politician in Europe most like me, Sarah Wagenknecht, of the new left-wing Alternative for Germany. She got 6% of the vote and won 6 MEPs. The AfD thoroughly beat Olaf Scholz. And the Greens, led by bonkers Baerbock, the most stupid foreign minister in European history, was slashed from 21% of the vote to merely 12%. The writing's on the wall for the war coalition of Schulz and Baerbock, and it doesn't make happy reading for either of them. We'll come back to whether or not all of that means there's going to be less war, less sanctions, whether there's going to be more of a challenge to the EU and NATO later in the show, because it does not necessarily follow, as the example of Italy's Premier Meloni has already shown us. She won the elections in Italy hands down, but that's because she's still saying the same words that she used to say against the so-called centre, so-called left opposition. But her deeds say something different. In Austria, the ruling Freedom Party won a stunning victory, doubling the number of members of the European Parliament that they had. So now there are elections in Belgium, elections in France, elections in Britain, and elections in America. And the centrist swamp is sinking before our very eyes. Sunak will be out in a couple of weeks. Biden will be out in a couple of months. Macron may decide to cohabit with Le Pen, with a Le Pen government in the National Assembly, and with him clinging on to his throne in Versailles, or he may just walk away, because the French people have decided that enough is enough. We don't want any more austerity caused by your never-ending sanctions against anyone in the world that Joe Biden tells you to sanction. And the French people have told Macron very firmly They have no intention of allowing you to march their brave soldiers into Odessa to fight the Russian army. And the French people have told Macron very clearly that we are tired of sanctions too. Which brings me to Germany. I spent a lot of time in Germany over the winter. It was a long, cold winter. All public buildings are unheated. The German economy is being unscrewed from the floor with their great engineering factories in the powerhouse of Europe being shipped literally to the United States of America because energy costs in Germany are simply unpayable, or won't be paid at least, by the great engineering powerhouses of these great German companies that dominated Western economies for so long. And the reason for that is because America blew up Germany's pipeline, the Nord Stream 2, and Germany pretended not to know that they had done it, and because Germany has been in the front line of the war against Russia being mounted by NATO over this last 2 years nearly. Now, the people of Germany were never asked if they wanted to go back to war with Russia, because of course they've been at war with Russia before, and it didn't end well. Although it did end with the overthrow of Nazism and the death of the Beast of Berlin under the rubble caused by the sheer firepower of the Red Army in May of 1945. The Germans were never asked if they wanted a rerun, and yet their special forces are there in Ukraine. They were never asked if they wanted to send their panzers back into Ukraine for the first time since the Battle of Kursk smashed the German tank army in 1944. They were never asked if they wanted to risk it all again. And the answer now in the European Parliament, in a diffuse asking of the question, is no, we do not. Now, let me turn to what all this actually means. It's a kind of health warning. You see, Meloni said all these things before she was elected Prime Minister of Italy. And yet, in power, she has been a slavish supporter of EU diktat, including on the things like the massive influx of refugees coming from Africa, landing on the shores of Italy. She hasn't done anything about that. They told her that it would not be acceptable for them, for Italy to opt out of EU and NATO diktat, and she has accepted that. Le Pen in France, she says all these things too, claims to be a French nationalist. Well, we'll see if she's going to put France first in front of the orders of the United States. There will be early opportunities to test that. Ditto the AfD in Germany, which has been under full deep state pressure to change its spots. Will it still be a leopard under those spots? We will see. If Germany now says that it wants to repair its relations with Russia, stop the endless sanctions regimes placed on every country that America doesn't like, will the French do the same? All of these things are open questions. But the one question that has now been answered is that Blairism, centrism, the swamp of liberalism has sunk in front of our eyes. Nobody wants it. Nobody loves it. Neither left nor right want any more centrism. It's a very exciting time to be alive in the middle of a British general election. And for American viewers, it must have severe implications for the presidency in November. You're watching Have It Out with Galloway, and on this show, you get to speak back. I'm glad you're here. Stay tuned. Galloway. Yes, it's Have It Out with Galloway. Here we ask you to ask us the questions. First up is Dr. Saida Ani Wakar in London, UK. Dr. Saida, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. What would you like to ask?
Thank you very much. First of all, a very amazing introduction and the start to the program, where the first thing that really comes into mind is we've all often seen that EU, your European Union, has traditionally been seen as a strong and a united global player. But as we speak of all the internal divisions and the uncertainties that we see are kind of resulting from these elections that we are foreseeing, and it could weaken its position. This could probably affect the negotiations on various issues that could either be trade, security, or climate change. And these are the sort of apprehensions that perhaps we have in terms of the outcomes of the elections. The question really is, how might really the outcomes of these elections in the European Union impact the future of the European Union and its relationship with the global powers when we're dealing with these all sorts of matters like security, climate change, and whatever is at the moment happening in the Middle East?
Well, I'll tell you what, Doctor, I hope it weakens the European Union to the point that it actually begins to fall apart at the seams. I don't want the European Union. I'm extremely glad that we were successful in leaving it. And for those who opposed us in the Brexit campaign, I say, you told us that we had to remain in the European Union or Britain would become a right-wing nationalist, racist cesspit. Well, that prediction doesn't look too hot now. The truth is, the European Union is an utterly, totally undemocratic institution. And I don't want to be part of any union that I cannot vote for those who rule me and I cannot remove those who rule me. And that is precisely what the European Union was, is, and always will be until it is abolished. But when the people get a chance to have their say, as they did over the last few days, this is the result. The result is we hate your centrism, we hate your liberal virtue signaling, we hate your neoliberal economics, we hate your imperialist foreign policy, we hate the fact that you are infatuated with war, and perhaps above all, we hate the fact that you have taken the knee to the most imbecilic American president that we have ever had, who can't even control his own bowel movements on the stage at Normandy in the commemorations of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. We no longer want to serve America's interests. Now, nobody who voted over the last few days will have been able to, or might have wanted to, put what I've just said in that way. But each constituent part of what I've just said is the only possible explanation for the fact that Italy, that Austria, that Belgium, that Germany, that France could have voted in the way that they did. And a big question for us, Dr. Saida, is what does this mean for the upcoming British general election? If you ask me, if I was a betting man, I'd say it strengthens Nigel Farage's hand in those elections very considerably indeed. Let me go from England to Scotland, where Niall Fraser in the fine town of Hamilton joins me now. Nice to see you again, Niall.
Yeah, so it's good to see you, George. Long time no see. Congratulations on your election victory. So I loved your preamble; it was fantastic. And I just wanted to see your sort of your prediction of the future with the EU in terms of the way that the sort of elections are falling at the moment. Where does this leave the currency agreements in terms of the BRICS? Do you see the euro going down the tubes?
Well, one BRICS will be worth 55 US dollars as of today. And when it comes, it'll be very much more worthwhile holding it than holding the US dollar. That's my first prediction. The euro was always a thoroughly flawed idea because economic, fiscal, monetary conditions in Bulgaria could never be the same as they were in Britain. In Bulgaria, the average wage is £1 an hour. That's one of the reasons why so many Bulgarians came to work in Britain when they could. One size doesn't fit all now. You cannot have the same currency and the same monetary policy in one country as opposed to another. Even the rich core of the EU, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium and France, and Britain for that matter when we were in it, don't have the same economic and monetary requirements and needs. So the best thing they could do, even if they don't abolish their European Union, is to abolish the euro. I look forward to the day when I can go to France and pay in francs, when I can go to the Netherlands and pay in guilders, in Portugal in escudos, in Germany in marks. That will be better for them, and I personally will enjoy it more. But let me take the opportunity now, because I know your own political views, of saying this about Farage. Is Farage a new Meloni, or is Farage a Galloway in a cheaper suit? Is Farage going to continue to support the NATO war drive against Russia? Is he going to continue to be foaming at the mouth in support of Netanyahu? Why? He never was any of those things before. And yet he is exactly those things now. Is that because someone's compromised him? Has someone purchased him? Or have they merely rented him? All of that will be seen in due course. I want to welcome a legend to the show. Erobas Abzu Lamashtu in New York City, who's a frequent guest and a very welcome one on my mother of all talk shows. Erobas, welcome finally to Have It Out with Galloway. What would you like to say?
Greetings and salutations, Mr. Galloway, the future Prime Minister of what would be the new and improved Great Britain.
Thank you.
And love to you, your family, the viewers here, supporters on the wall, as well as the creators of this show. What I have to say is this. The government of the United States of America is a corporation that pretends to be a country. Unless somehow Jill Stein breaks through, elections in the most dangerous and reckless corporation in the world that still has an inordinate amount of influence upon the apostate world is a foregone conclusion. In the present incarnation of America, elections is a dictatorship parade of the uniparty and drag. This means the only way to stop the USA is in the imposition of punishing economic sanctions and in the direct confrontation in the multiple war arenas. In the toil and trouble, boil and bubble of its perpetual and transferable wars, anyone who believes that they can remove the Anglo-American fascistoid corporation via the ballot box is intensely laboring under a massive delusion. What sayest thou, Mr. G?
I did tell you it was a legend. That's pure poetry. It's interesting you said the Uni-Party in drag. I saw Dr. Jill Stein's latest pronouncement in which she pledges her entire troth to the 2SLGBTQI plus A, which is an alphabet that I'm really struggling to comprehend, and definitely not an alphabet that's going to play in Peoria, not an alphabet that's going to have the blue-collar workers in Detroit, Michigan, out filled with enthusiasm for her. It shows, and I'm a supporter of hers, by the way, as the best candidate on offer, but it does show the limitations of those who imagine that an alphabet soup such as that is the way to the heart of the American working class, is the way to the heart of the great communities of African Americans, Italian Americans, all the mosaic that makes up the USA. And I say that with all respect, Dr. Jill, lay off that stuff and stick to the bread and butter and the case against the war. The thing is, Arobas, elections are just part of the toolbox. They're not the be-all and end-all. They're not going to deliver us into the promised land. They are something that we must engage in. They raise consciousness. It's a time when more people than usual are thinking about politics, and more ideas than usual are clashing in the conflict. But the United States choice of Trump versus Biden could not more encapsulate my now famous, I think they'll put it on my grave, now famous epithet, they're two cheeks of the same ass. And nobody should support either of those two cheeks, especially when you know the state of the Joe Biden ass. Arobas, thanks for allowing me the opportunity to say that. Let's go to London town. Niall Musavi. Niall, welcome. What would you like to say?
Thank you so much, Mr. Galloway. I appreciate everything you do. Thank you so much. Big shout out to you and your team and everything that you guys do. I want to just ask, and I want to hear more from you. Of course, I'll keep this very short. In light of the recent EU election results, we all know how they went. How do we think this will affect the union's overall foreign policy direction? In particular, regarding the humanitarian aid and their conflict resolution in regions like Gaza, which we all need to be paying heed to.
Well, there's a difference emerging in the... First of all, I should say, these so-called nationalist parties that have won such a crushing victory are, without exception, fanatic supporters of Netanyahu's Israel. So just because they are more skeptical on the war drive against Russia, which is, of course, an even more important thing because it has within it, pregnant in it, is the end of the world, thermonuclear war, hypersonic thermonuclear war, bringing about the end of all humanity. But Gaza is also very dangerous in that regards, and all these parties, with the exception of the left party in Germany, Sarah Wagenknecht's new formation, which is very similar to my own Workers' Party. If we get 6% of the vote in the upcoming elections, if we get 6 MPs, that will be a major step forward. That's what she achieved yesterday. But apart from Sarah, every one of these other parties, from Le Pen right to the AfD, right to the Freedom Party in Austria, all of them are slavish supporters of Netanyahu's massacres in Gaza. But there is some sign of detachment in France, where demonstrations have been truly massive and ongoing, and where there are 9 million Muslim voters who care as passionately as anybody else about Gaza, and maybe more than most people about Gaza. There are some signs in France and some signs in Spain where Borrell, the so-called foreign minister of the European Union, has been moving quite far, actually, in a direction sympathetic to the Palestinian people. We'll have to see, as in every other aspect of the EU's affairs, what the impact of last weekend's elections is going to be. Thanks for the call. Now I'm joined by my good friend, the former US Marine Intelligence Officer, and more pertinently in this regard, or as pertinently, the former United Nations Weapons Inspector, the excellent and wise Scott Ritter. Scott, welcome to the show. We've been discussing the impact of the European Parliament results on the war drive against Russia. We'll park Gaza aside because almost all of them are fanatic supporters of the destruction of Gaza, but all of them on paper, at least, want to see an end to the war drive and even the economic sanctions against Russia. How do you assess the situation in that regard?
George, this was an inevitable outcome. In America in 1992, as Bill Clinton was running for office, James Carville, one of his principal advisors, famously put a note on Clinton's door. It's the economy, stupid, he wrote, meaning that Clinton needed to stop focusing on foreign policy issues and things of that nature and focus on what matters most to the American public. It's the economy. That's a universal reality. I mean, if a government is doing poorly in terms of the economic well-being of its constituent population, that government, usually in a democratic society, isn't that long in power. In Europe, they have made a collective decision, a suicidal decision, to blindly support American policies that seek to sanction the Russian economy and to support a conflict in Ukraine that's unwinnable from a European Union standpoint. Both of these have had and will continue to have dire economic consequences. And I think what we're seeing play out in these European parliamentary elections are what these consequences are. People do not blindly support these policies that have been put in place by the various European powers. This is an especial slap in the face to France's President Macron, who was seeking to expand the conflict by bringing French military resources into play on the ground in Ukraine. He now has had to call for a snap election, and if the trend holds, we will see a situation where the presidency is controlled by one political line of thinking and the parliament by another, and that will bring to an end, his Napoleonic ambitions regarding Russia.
Well, let's stay with little Napoleon for a minute. His rejection was the most total. He got 14.8% of the vote, and the National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen, got 34.5%. So well over double his vote. And as you say, he's been the only European head of state that actually wanted and expressed his intention to move French soldiers into Odessa. He was very clear about it. They were going to defend Western civilization in Odessa. Although in my many visits to Odessa, it looked perfectly civilized to me without the need of French attention. But he was going to do that. He can't now, can he?
I believe not. The president has certain authorities, executive authorities in time of war, but France is not at war with Russia. Therefore, to dispatch French military resources will require the support of the French parliament. That support most likely won't be there following these snap elections. So, we've seen a situation where democracy is actually healed itself. I oftentimes get mocked about what, my faith in the American people doing the right thing. But I ultimately believe that at the end of the day, when people are given a chance to be empowered with knowledge and information and understand the consequences of their decisions, they tend to make the right decisions. And in France, I believe the French people will make the right decision not to support as we've said, the Napoleonic ambitions of this modern miniature Napoleon, sort of a mini me Napoleon, and instead bring France back into a more rational. Look, Europe has dug itself into a giant hole here. There's no easy way out of what they've done vis-a-vis Ukraine, but there is a way out, and it requires Europe to hit the pause button on some of the more inflammatory policies and then go into reverse. And I think we're starting to see the beginning of that process.
Germany, of course, where the rejection was very humiliating. The Greens were cut from 21% to 12%. The SPD, led by little soldier Schulz, scored its lowest ever in its entire history, and its history is 125 years or more old. It was the lowest vote they have ever polled. Their government is hauled below the waterline, and on the face of it, I say on the face of it because I remember Meloni, on the face of it, we now have a resurgent nationalist party, AfD, which very definitely wants to end the confrontation with Russia. Will they stand fast, do you think, or will they do as Meloni appears to have done and won her election on one set of attitudes, only to implement the diametric opposite?
Politics is a strange world, as you know, George, and politicians oftentimes are guilty of saying one thing and then doing another once they get elected. But in the case of Germany, again, because we're tying the policy to economic reality, there's no alternative to restore Germany's economic power, economic health, to bringing an end to this conflict. There is no plan B. The concept of continuous conflict and furthering Germany's new addiction to, American natural gas, which costs, many times more than the price they're paying for a Russian gas. That's an unsustainable policy. And so too is the internal domestic, realities of this conflict. Germany has talked about sending a brigade of troops to Lithuania, expanding the battalion they currently have. But it's not a guarantee that they can do this. They have to recruit soldiers who volunteer to serve overseas because Germany isn't at war, and constitutionally you can't deploy German troops overseas without their express permission or the permission of the legislature. They don't have a viable economy and industrial base to produce the tanks and the infantry fighting vehicles needed to build this brigade. Cost of steel is prohibitive now because of the high cost of gas. So Germany has positioned itself to be unable to meet the ambitions of the Schulz government. And I don't see any new government coming in or any players in new government, making the same mistakes. I see that politically speaking, they have no choice but to follow through with their pre-election posture of being opposed to the conflict because the economic reality dictates no other possibility.
Let's assume, it's a big assumption, that President Biden was sentient enough to understand the implications of these election results. They don't look good for him, do they?
No, I mean, it's on paper, it doesn't look good for him. Well, I would say that the American political dynamic is a unique beast, and that people who would dare bet money on the outcome of an election based upon June data are fools. You don't begin to place your bets until late September at the earliest, usually not till the middle of October, because there's just so many things that can happen that change the way the American people will lean. I do, though, think that this is part of an accumulation of realities that the Biden administration cannot ignore. We're going to have another reality at the end of this week, this collapsed peace conference that was supposed to serve as a foundation of pressure against Putin and Russia, pressure that would be brought on by a unified Europe and a unified world. Well, we now see there is no unified Europe, and the world is fleeing this conference quicker than rats running from a sinking ship. So I think the Biden administration is going to have to adapt its Ukraine policy based upon this developing reality, and they need to do something that has an impact on their election potential. They don't want to roll into October with a losing conflict on the books. They need to push for some sort of resolution to this conflict as soon as possible. And I think that means that you're going to see a change sometime this summer.
As George W. Bush might have put it, they underestimated Russia, didn't they? It's been the biggest boomerang in history, this policy of war and sanctions against Russia.
This is indeed a gross miscalculation on the part of the United States, but it's a collective miscalculation, not just by the Biden administration, but by the American government. The belief that we could strip Ukraine away from the Russian orbit. Remember, it was 2008 during the presidency of George W. Bush that the concept of Ukrainian membership was first floated, and is continued under Obama, Trump, and Biden. So this is an American political problem. This is the Biden political problem.
The dogs are calling you, Scott Ritter. A magnificent interview that will live long. Thank you very much for joining us. Scott Ritter, the former UN arms inspector, a man who actually has defused a nuclear bomb. Let's go to London. Sakina Virani. Sakina, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to speak to you, Mr. Galloway. My question is, obviously, the recent EU elections saw significant gains for right-wing parties across Europe, which are often associated with strong anti-immigration and anti-minority stances. And reports have noted a 70% increase in Islamophobic incidents in 2023. So how do you perceive these developments impacting the broader European political landscape, and what implications do they have for the UK, especially in fostering cross-border solidarity and combating Islamophobia post-Brexit?
Well, I repeat the point I made earlier, just because it gives me the opportunity to say I told you so. All kinds of people said to me during the Brexit campaign that Britain was the most racist country, and that we needed the European Union to civilize us, as if we were the people who were painting our faces blue and living in the forest. But the opposite is true. The truth is there is not a single far-right elected official the length and breadth of this country. Not one. Not one fascist, not one Nazi, not one neo-Nazi, neo-fascist, not one AFD or French National Rally, or not one. The British people intrinsically are a good people who believe in fairness. We have our share, of course, of racists, but a racist cannot get elected in Britain. They have to hide it. If they stand as the kind of parties that have just won in Europe, they will not be elected. And I think that's a great tribute to the British people. Now, we've got Nigel Farage. He has burst back on the scene when they had a debate which excluded me entirely unfairly, I believe unlawfully. It was a panel of 7 dwarfs in which Farage was easily the tallest, and the opinion polls showed that he was the most popular of the panelists. 25% thought that he won the show. He'll be greatly emboldened by the results in Europe. He will sharpen his rhetoric. The Tories will follow him, and Labour will follow them. And that's already happening in the British general election. I stand foursquare on this. I don't care what color you are. I don't care however you pray. I don't care whenever you came here. If you are here in Britain, you are an equal of any other person in this land. And prejudice and bigotry will be resisted, if necessary, to the death by me and by my friends in the Workers' Party of Britain. We don't care what color people are. We don't care who they sleep with. We don't care what they do with their personal lives, as long as they are consenting adults, and as long as they are not trying to force our children to celebrate their way of life. They can continue with their way of life as they please. That's our stance. The danger is that this becomes a Dutch auction, the British general election, a Dutch auction in which the big parties vie with each other for who can be the most vile. Now, what number am I going to now? Let me go to Houston, Texas. Houston, we have a problem, and I'm very glad, Vale Delgado, that you are here to solve it. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, hi, George. Well, for one, I would like to know your opinion on how the election, either candidate, is going to affect the current conflicts that we have today. Like, for instance, I do believe that Russia is a threat to the free world. I do believe that they are attacking a sovereign nation and expanding their sphere of influence. I believe Putin is a dictating warlord. So I would like to know, like, where do you see the conflict going if either Trump or Biden wins?
Well, I'm not sure that somebody sitting in Houston, Texas can call President Putin a dictating warlord. After all, the United States has been involved in the invasion, in the subjugation, in the overthrow of more than 50 countries since the Second World War. It's the United States that goes around the world invading people. It's the United States that dropped the atomic weapons on Japan. And it's the United States that have got an election running right at this moment between an imbecile who can't control his own bowels and a ranting, raving madman who nobody else in the world can even understand what he is saying. So as the Bible says, look to the beam in your own eyes before pointing out the mote in the eyes of others. President Putin just got re-elected with a vast majority, despite the efforts of Western countries to bring him down, to break his country up, to subjugate it in the way that they had hoped they would continue to do. They didn't invade Ukraine. They entered Ukraine to protect the Russians in Ukraine, as any superpower or any decent power would do, like Vietnam did when it invaded the neighboring country of Cambodia, because Pol Pot was massacring people, particularly people of Vietnamese origin. Now, 30%, fully 1/3 of the Ukrainian population are Russians. That's the unfortunate truth of it. It's one of the consequences of the breakup of the former Soviet Union. It left, just like the breakup of Yugoslavia, left Serbian people in every other constituent part of Yugoslavia. What are you going to do? You're going to allow your co-religionists, your compatriots, to the tender mercy of people whose entire politics is based upon the othering of the minority, and in this case, the othering of the Russian people in eastern Ukraine. So the massacres that occurred since 2014 and the overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine by you, by your country. It was your country that brought about the overthrow of the democratically elected government in Kiev and began a pogrom against the Russian minority there. Who's going to allow their people to be pogromed next door when you are more than capable of doing something about it? And that's what Putin did. I just say this to you, Mr. Houston, Texas. If any of your presidential candidates are even a quarter as capable as President Putin, America will be very lucky indeed. Let's go to London, shall we? Tet Kofi is in London with a very, very important question. Brother, welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, George. Does the fact that Macron was spooked into a rushed general election call show just how scared what I would like to call the establishment is across the European Union? And is it because he realizes that the longer the electioneering goes on by Le Pen, that the smaller yet his majority is going to get?
I think that's perfectly expressed. I'm not sure I even need to add to it. That is exactly what has happened. And of course, it happened in our country too. Little Rishi Sunak cut and ran in a July general election when he still had 184 MP candidates to pick. They even failed to field MP candidates in 2 constituencies in the British general election. But it's exactly the same dynamic. Little Macron saw opposition to him from the left and from the right growing so large, he might have ended up like King Louis XVI on the square, under the guillotine, and his good wife along with him. That's the way France was going. France was going towards a revolution. People are rising in unvanquishable number in France against the policies of Macron. And some of them are left, some of them are right, all of them are against Macron. He is the perfect exemplar of the extent to which centrism, Blairism, has completely failed. And no one wants it anymore. In France, you've got someone like me in the form of Mr. Mélenchon, who came very close, by the way, only 2% in it, to being the opponent of Macron last time. And if he had been, he would have won it. And we'd had a very different Europe today if he had. In other countries, there isn't someone like Mélenchon. In America, for example, there isn't someone like Mélenchon. But it's the death of centrism. It's the death of the pretense that by putting on the frilly clothes of liberalism, you can blind the people to their economic reality. That by fixating on the issues of women and men and whether men can become women, the fixating on identity politics right across the board, you can keep the people's eye off the fact that they can no longer put bread on the table. They can no longer afford to live. They can't find a decent place to live. Can't afford it if they find it. Can't find a proper job paying proper wages. Brother, when I was as young as some of the people I see on this wall right now, a father could earn enough in his job that the mother could stay at home and bring up the children. And the council had enough money to fill a municipal swimming pool, community centers, play facilities, the public realm, youth facilities. That's the way it used to be. Now, the man and wife have got to work. One or maybe both of them are working 2 jobs. The kids are bringing up themselves. The councils have no money, can produce no facilities, and they wonder why young people are struggling to stay on the right path. I've got to go to Scotland, not least because there's a very young man here who doesn't even know what I'm talking about, can't possibly remember the days that I'm talking about. Robbie Parlane in Scotland. Go ahead, Robbie.
Hello, thanks for having me on. Well, there's been a lot of talk about Nigel Farage and reform today, but they've definitely sparked some controversy because one of their candidates was saying that Britain should have stayed neutral during World War II and not fought the Nazis. Nigel Farage was asked about this today and said that it was probably true, so kind of defended him. Now, I know you have a very anti-war stance when it comes to maybe Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Palestine. So do you agree with that statement?
I fundamentally disagree with it. And moreover, I think it is the first big political mistake that Nigel Farage has ever made. And that's a big claim, ever made. He should have said that his candidate was talking out of his backside, and in fact was no longer his candidate, was sacked. For somebody to say, days after the D-Day commemoration of the heroes that invaded Western Europe, that sacrificed on the beaches of Normandy, that it would have been better if we had bent the knee to Hitler and remained neutral in a Europe where the Holocaust murdered millions of people, millions of them, people of all kinds, Jews, gypsies, gays, trade unionists, socialists, communists, murdered, massacred systematically, more than 10 million people in the Holocaust, and we should have remained neutral? I think exactly the opposite. That the hour that we refused to bend the knee to Hitler and make a negotiated peace with Hitler was, as Mr. Churchill said, our finest hour. And that the summer of 1941, when we, in the Battle of Britain, saved these islands from Nazi invasion, was our finest summer. If I'd been alive, and if I'd been old enough, I would have been the first man at the recruitment office to volunteer to fight fascism in Europe. My maternal grandfather, Thomas O'Reilly, a communist, an Irish Republican, a Roman Catholic, an Irish nationalist, volunteered to join the British Army in the Second World War and fought throughout under Montgomery in the 8th Army. And when people said to him, "Why are you, an Irish Republican, fighting for the British?" he said, "I'm not fighting for the British. I'm fighting fascism. And fighting fascism is an absolute duty on all decent human beings. Because if fascism were to prevail, you could forget about all the other things that I stand for, that I have fought for." So, Robbie, this is a major blunder by Farage. I'm sure that the Tories will drive a coach and horses through it. It has blunted his rise. And I've got to tell you that what the candidate said and what Farage said is a view held by a fifth column that was present then and is present now in our country. People who in their hearts quite liked Adolf Hitler, quite liked fascism, and would quite like to put perhaps a different group of people into the death camps and the concentration camps again. Now, let me go to where now? Number 9, Mr. Kelly. Charles Kelly, Kelly, in London. Charles, welcome.
A good Irish name. Well, thank you, George, for telling. And well said. What you just said there, well said. I admire you for saying that. Looking at the EU elections over the weekend and this move to the right, I saw Ursula von der Leyen saying, you know, we're the biggest party and we're going to fight everyone that doesn't agree with us. I just wonder if this will be a change or whether the EU will just carry on regardless of what people think, because it's not just about immigration, it's about the way they treated farmers, it's about their green policies, about forcing their way on people. And personally, I think they're a corrupt and evil organization, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Very, very well said. I really appreciate, Charles, what you just said there, both parts of what you just said. Let me deal with the second part. The reality is that the EU is not a democracy. It's one of the reasons why I fought for Britain to leave it. The European Parliament has no real power, can't make laws, can only appoint officials up to a certain level and can't set the policy. The policy is set by von der Leyen, whose father was a Nazi soldier, by the way, a Nazi officer in Hitler's army. Von der Leyen and people like her in the so-called Commission, which is the Politburo of the European Union, they do have the power on paper to carry on as usual. But, as Bill Shankly said, on paper we should beat them. But football's not played on paper, it's played on grass. The grass that this is now being played on is a rising tide in Europe, which, if not last weekend, in the weekends to come, in the elections to come, will sweep all these people away. So look out for them talking big, we shall not be moved, but watch out for just how they are moved over the next days, weeks, and months. I appreciate everyone who tried to get on the wall with me today, and I apologize to those that didn't. It's been marvelous for me. I hope very much that it was for you. And if you enjoyed it, you can come back at the same time in the same place and make sure you register to be on that wall with me. Have it out with Galloway.com. Thanks for watching.